Today we are reaching the final chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And because it's such a long chapter, we will be discussing it in two parts. So this is part one, almost about halfway through the chapter. And we'll have a convenient break at that time when we can discuss the rest of the chapter next month. But it's enough for us to kind of think about so many different ways of looking at how we're going to practice our living through the Gita in a very kind of clear way, which Bhagwan presents to Arjuna. So this chapter is called Moksha Sannyāsa Yoga, liberation through renunciation. So Bhagwan is taking two words here. One is moksha and the other one is sannyāsa. And therefore the close connection between these two things, as we have been seeing through the previous chapters, is that one has to move through the spiritual journey, starting from the point where we step into the pathway and reaching up the final destination, which is moksha. And in the process, of course, sannyas is a very important stage of our journey. And we need to understand this relationship between sannyas and Tyāga, which Bhagwan is going to take up in this chapter. So let's look at the themes in this chapter, which is part one. And first of all, of course, we'll look at the logic and flow of thoughts so far and a brief recap. Now, as we know that Bhagwan has been talking about sannyas throughout the Bhagavad Gita, as well as abandonment, but not in the kind of way in which he's going to describe here, because he's using a different, slightly different terminology. So first of all, we'll see the flow of thought. And then to begin the chapter is Arjuna's questions to Bhagwan. Arjuna wants to know what is sannyas, what is Tyāga. And then Bhagwan responds by giving some definitions of sannyas and Tyāga. And then he goes on to explain the threefold nature of abandonment, which is Tyāga. And it is important to understand that, Bhagwan has taken this within the context of the guṇa-s. So we know that guṇa-s are a really very useful way of checking ourselves, monitoring. And even in the last couple of chapters that we have seen, that the guṇa-s become the basis on which we are going to examine what is going on in our thought process, in our feelings, in our actions in the world. So he takes up this particular framework of the guṇa-s in relationship to all that he's going to talk about here. And here he explains something which is central to our journey right from the very beginning. It's action itself. And like Bhagwan says, inaction is not an option. We have to act in the world. So the question then arises, is that what are we going to do? And of course, Arjuna is asking the same question. He says, look, I don't know what to do. You tell me what to do, and I will do what you prescribe for me. So the nature of action is very important to understand in this context. And Bhagwan describes 5 different aspects of the nature of action. And then he goes on to talk about impulse to and basis of action, because there's something pushing us to carry out the action. And how can we then begin to think about action? Because if we kind of have a very detailed explanation of action, then we can begin to understand how are we going to apply this in our own journey in this spiritual pathway. Then Bhagwan also gives us the threefold nature of knowledge, action, and the agent. And here, each one of these will be looked at in terms of the guṇa-s again. And when we look at the nature of action, we look at knowledge, we look at the agent, which is ourselves. Of course, you and me, we are the agents of our action. We begin to get a full picture as to how we need to think about this, the kind of way in which we are living our transactional life. See, at the end of the day, like I've been saying before, it's all about belief, attitude, and intention. so that we know what our beliefs are, we know what our intentions are, and that is the emotional connection with whatever we are doing. And then we know the intention behind our choices and actions. Then we begin to understand where we are in relationship to our spiritual pathway. And then Bhagwan goes on to talk about the threefold nature of understanding and fortitude. Now, very interesting why Bhagwan talks about understanding and fortitude in relationship to Sannyāsa and Tyāga. And also very much in relationship to the nature of action, impulse, and basis of action as well. See, fortitude is very important in our spiritual pathway. And we all know what fortitude is and why it is required. Okay. So then Bhagwan goes on to also talk about the outcome of all our actions, which we're going to talk about, is pleasure or joy. And the way in which we function in our transactional life really is about how do I get my joy out of the world and the objects of the world and my relationship with things, beings, and happenings. And how can I take my action so that I can get the maximum amount of happiness from my transactions? And of course, the kind of pleasure or joy we are going to get also is threefold in nature. And Bhagwan will talk about that as well. And then, of course, we will kind of stop at this point where this threefold nature of knowledge, action, agent, understanding, fortitude, and pleasure gives us a kind of comprehensive picture as to what we need to do and understand in order to be very kind of effective in our sadhana. And then the question is, what will we do now? And what are the kind of practical things which Bhagwan is telling us in this chapter as well? So this is briefly the kind of the themes which we are going to follow in the first part of this chapter number 18. Okay, so let's first of all go to the overview, which I've described before. And this is the third set of the 6 chapters, which talk about the relationship between the human and the divine, Purusha and Prakriti, and how we can understand this relationship in order to be more effective seekers. So that if we see that the divine is expressing itself in Prakriti, which is you and me, as this body-mind intellect, then if that divinity is either expressing or not expressing, what can we shift in terms of our belief, attitude, and intention so that it begins to take us towards purification, sattvification. And therefore, we've got to understand this relationship. And Bhagwan has kind of started by talking about this in chapter number 13 with the field and the knower of the field, whereby he begins to tell us about the divine, transactional, and the eternal. So the human and the divine, the transactional and the eternal. And to see what are the relationship between the field and the knower of the field being me as this individual body, mind, intellect, and the knower of the field being Atma, which is then the basis on which the body, mind, intellect is functioning. Then the 3 gunas, as I said, the 3 gunas are really important in terms of kind of framing our experiences and our choices and our intention and our beliefs and our attitudes and everything. So the 3 gunas is a description of Prakriti as these gunas play in our inner nature as well as our outer nature. Outer nature meaning the world around us, and how the being the unchanging within these 3 gunas, the changing gunas, which is the Prakriti, and the unchanging aspect, which is the divine, how can we begin to now discern what is there beyond the gunas and to transcend the gunas? And Bhagwan gives us a methodology of doing that as well. Then chapter number 15 is, okay, if I'm going to go to that which is the supreme, then what is that supreme being? And Purushottama and the manifestation as the jiva, how can I then begin to understand the world in this manner so that I can relate to it in the right way in order to for me to reach that which is the highest. The Uttam Purusha, the supreme being, is really my destination. And in this chapter, which is a wonderful chapter, which describes the journey of the jiva and how it gets caught up in Maya and the cycle of birth and death, and how through its very strong acts of detachment, it can begin to cut down the upside down tree, which is really the manifestation, the creation. And of course, contained within that is you and me, and how we get attached to various different things. And therefore, see, again, Bhagwan is going to take us through thinking about these attachments and what we need to do with them. So if we then go to the next chapter, Bhagwan talked about the divine and the devilish expressions in each individual. And as we move towards purification of the mind and purity of the mind, the divine begins to express itself. Otherwise, there is an expression of this demoniacal nature, devilish nature. And all it means is the Rajasic and the Tamasic elements are the kind of devilish natures, and the divine one is the one which is taking us towards the pure Sattvic way of functioning in life. And we got to recognize this thing. See, the thing about Bhagavad Gita, it gives you not only the ways to do your sadhana, but also gives us the means of monitoring what is going on in the moment in ourselves in order to gauge really where we are in terms of not only in the moment, but also in our spiritual journey. So these are important kind of considerations to take into account if we are a serious seeker, and therefore to constantly kind of reflect on what am I doing? How have I done my actions today? On what basis was I functioning today? What quality or nature was I expressing? And why is it that I cannot express this, or I'm expressing this, and how can I move towards the divine? This should always be the question in our mind. And the last chapter we did was the threefold faith. Faith, of course, as we know, is the foundation of spiritual life, and we should understand what is the right faith which we need to move towards, how to move towards a Sattvic faith, and therefore the basis, the platform of the Sattvicness, the purity of the mind, the purified mind, which then allows us to jump into or ascend into that which is the eternal. And of course, this chapter is the culmination and summary of the knowledge and guidance given to Arjuna through these 17 chapters. But of course, Bhagwan has a certain focus in this chapter number 18, as we will see, and what Arjuna then decides to do, just like we have decided to do something about what Bhagwan has told us to do. Okay, so why I'm going to talk about the gunas again, as I talked about in the last chapter as well, is because the gunas are very important in terms of understanding what Bhagwan is also going to say in this chapter. So gunas are attributes of nature and determine the functioning of all elements of nature, whether it is living, non-living, whether it's you and me, whether it's the world outside and the forces, whatever is going on. The gunas are the attributes of nature which determine the dynamic nature of Prakriti or the static nature of Prakriti. And all that needs to be taken into account. In terms of the jiva, gunas are attributes of the jiva, the body and the mind and the intellect. And they function according to their nature, which are the gunas. Now, some of the gunas are fixed in the sense of, we can't do some things outside ourselves, but as far as the jiva is concerned, there is always the possibility through choice, because if there is no choice, there is no need to have Bhagavad Gita, because we'll just be going along in life, just flowing along with it. But because we have freedom, because we have got freedom of choice, because we may take responsibility for those choices, and because change is possible, then it is possible to change the gunas of the body, mind, intellect. And this is, of course, what we are doing in our sadhanas as well. So jiva experiences the functions of the body, and experience arises in the body, mind, intellect. So body, mind, intellect is the basis in which all these gunas are functioning. We have got this pivot, what we call the pivot, which is going to change one thing into another. Transformation can take place through this very important pivot. In this case, it is the buddhi. Buddhi becomes our charioteer. It becomes the way in which we are going to use the rationality of the mind to determine which direction the mind is going or not going. And that is the basis of changing the gunas. Awareness, Sattvic, activity, Rajas, and apathy. tamas, are experienced through the play of the gunas, and these are the things which bind us. And of course, we saw in the last chapter how each one of the gunas can bind us in the earlier chapter as well, that each has got a way of binding us to the object of our attention, the object of our desire. Whether it's Sattvic, Rajasic, or Tamasic, the object also is related to our expression of those desires in the way of the gunas. Now, what happens is a jiva becomes mistakenly identified with these experiences which are going on in the body, mind, intellect, and becomes the doer and enjoyer of all these experiences. So I say to myself, I'm the body, my leg is hurting today, I don't know what I'm going to do about it. My feeling is really in this kind of way. I'm feeling elated because I've done something today which has made me to achieve certain things. And Sattwicness. So all these things are going on in my body, mind, intellect. In the intellect, something rationality is going on, reasoning is going on. And I say to myself, this thought is me, this feeling is me, this sensation is me, I am this body, mind, intellect. And I become the doer, I become the enjoyer of all these experiences. Therefore, the human purpose is to attain liberation through the purification of the mind and increasing the dominance of the sattva guna. And this also arises in this chapter, as we will see, and then to establish ourselves in the truth. So we have seen the references to the gunas previously, and the Vedas deal with the three attributes. Be you above these three gunas. This is the prescription of Lord Shri Krishna. He says, transcend the gunas, go above the gunas, because this is not you, this is not your nature, you are that which is the divine. Free from yourself, from the pairs of opposite, ever remain in sattva, freed from all thoughts and acquisitions and preservation, and be established in that self. Again, this kind of theme is running even in chapter number 18, as we will see. All actions are performed in all cases merely by the qualities in nature, gunas, and he whose mind is deluded by egoism thinks, I am the doer. Even in this chapter, Bhagwan will say how to get away from the doership and the enjoyership. And that is really the basis of Tyāga and Sannyāsa. But he who knows the truth almighty armed about the division of the qualities and their functions, and he who knows that gunas as senses move amidst the gunas as objects, that person is not attached. See, knowledge is very important. And one of the things which Bhagwan mentions also in this chapter is the knowledge. And here Bhagwan says, if you know that the gunas are moving in the gunas, my body, mind, intellect is moving in the gunas in this transactional world. If I know that, then I have got the means of monitoring and transcending the gunas. Okay, so here again, just to kind of briefly remind ourselves of the ego operating system, which is based on the me and the mind. Again, it is relevant for us to understand within the context of this chapter in terms of abandonment and renunciation. So we know that the past conditionings are the vasanas. We can kind of categorize them in terms of intention, belief, and attitude. They function in the body, mind, intellect, sensations, feelings, thoughts, which come together as a totality of experience. And these vasanas are the drivers of our, not only our experience, but our actions in the world. And whenever we do actions, reactions come about, and they feed back into our minds, and therefore either strengthen the vasanas or create more vasanas, create more karmas as well, and so on and so on. So this is how the normal functioning is taking place. And of course, we know that the synthesis of karma yoga and jnana yoga, which is being talked about in this chapter, is also about svabhava, vasanas, as we have seen, is the basis of our experience. We need to get into swadharma through karma yoga, and of course, to discover our true nature through jnana yoga and dhyana yoga. These sequences we have seen, this part of our journey we have already examined. And here, in the context of this chapter, then we can see Swabhava is the ego, me and mine, and the identity and attachment. At the heart of this chapter also is the idea that attachments are there and identity is there. Me and mine. And when we look at the Karma Yogi, he is taking care of the attachments in the first place, because that is the way in which we begin our spiritual journey. As we know, Karma Yoga becomes the basis of our purification of the mind. Karma Yoga, of course, associated with Bhakti Yoga as well. So abandoning attachment to the fruit of our actions, attachment to the things of the world as objects of our desire becomes Tyāga. And then Jnana Yogi, he renounces the identity. See again, me and mine. So the me is taken care of and the mine is taken care of as well. And this is how Bhagwan is going to frame this chapter as well, whereby he is talking about both these things, Tyāga and Sannyāsa, and Arjuna asking very important question, because he's brought the whole thing full circle, right? And starting with Karma Yoga, where we learned about, detachment from the fruit of the actions, and then going right up to chapter number 6, whereby in the state of sannyas, complete sannyas, we are able to lift ourselves from the body, mind, intellect. So we see this sequence taking place, and Bhagwan now turns the focus again on Tyāga and Sannyāsa. So we have to remember these sequences, because if we have this in our mind, again, it is a way in which we can understand our own spiritual journey. Why? Because these are what Bhagwan are saying are the different stages and ways in which we can deal with our sadhana in each one of these stages. Again, referring back to chapter number 2, knowledge, Sankhya, is sannyas. I'm not the doer. Practice, yoga, is the practice of karma yoga. I'm not the enjoyer, Tyāga. And then the culmination of these practices leads us to perfection. Perfection as the sthita prajna, the one who gets established in the knowledge. Characteristics of the one who established in knowledge. And this is now sannyas and Tyāga put in the context of chapter number 2, which Bhagwan now is going to explain in this chapter, and says goes into the detail of another aspect of these things, so that we can understand it in relationship to what? To perfection, to moksha. So again, looking at it from the point of view of the sthita prajna lakshana, me and mine, full of desires, attachment, in me and mine mode, agitated, no control of the senses, slips down the ladder of fall, sleeping in ignorance. And when the Tyāga begins to take place by removing our attachments to the fruit of the actions as well as the objects around us, senses, mind under control. That is what is going to remove the mind. Controlling desires, attachments, anger, and fear. Purified of attachments, able to meditate. This is what Tyāga brings to us through the method of control and discipline. And then sannyas, satisfied in the self by the self, free from fear and anger, free from minus, equanimity, steady wisdom, peace and tranquility, awake in Brahmic state, beyond delusion. Who doesn't want to be there? I want to be there. I want to remove the me and the mind so I can experience the bliss of Brahman. So this Brahmic state is really where we want to get to. The Brahmic sthiti is where the destination is, and Tyāga and sannyas are the processes through which we are going to reach that stage. Coming back again to what I talked about earlier on in the context of this chapter, so we have seen this absolute standpoint and the relative standpoint. From the relative standpoint, of course, we have to keep on doing action and go from the ego operating system to the dharma operating system. And there is a way in which this is to be done, as Bhagwan has told us. And here I see myself as the individual self, the doer and the enjoyer, and then slowly getting away from the enjoyership, and then slowly getting away from the doership by going into Jnana Yoga and Dhyana Yoga. So in this context, then, Bhagwan is saying, okay, we need to have Tyāga and Sannyāsa in order to reach that higher stage through right action, right knowledge, right belief, right attitude, right intention. And this, again, he's going to talk about what do we mean by right action? What do we mean by the right knowledge? And again, in the context of the gunas, he's going to tell us exactly what that is. Okay, so again, another picture we have seen before is this journey steadily going from the karmi to the atmavit. Steady renunciation of the fruits of action and action, disidentification from enjoyership and doership, so that we slowly travel along through meditation, then we achieve that which is the highest. And in this context, we see how karma yogi is also the tyagi who is given up the enjoyments, attachment to the fruit of the actions. And then having attained that, the jnana yogi, through the knowledge, renounces the sense of self, the ego identity, the doership. So the first stage is giving up the enjoyership. The second stage is maintaining the giving up of enjoyership, but also now going towards giving up the sense of doership as well. And then what happens is that we begin to step apart from the body, mind, intellect. We can step apart in the sense of becoming the witness of the body, mind, intellect. And becoming the witness of the body, mind, intellect, this Sakshi Bhava will take us to that highest state whereby we will attain the realization of the self. Now here you see the cowboy, and it is Dhyana Yoga. Of course, cowboy has got something to do with Dhyana Yoga, as we see. And he climbs onto the steed and complete control of the steed so that he can control it in the way he wants to and take him to his destination. How is this relevant? Aruruksha is desiring to mount the steed, which is what the cowboy is doing. And then going to yoga rudhasya, having mounted, desiring to mount and having mounted. These are again two different stages of our journey. And desiring to mount is going to come how? By means of action, and action in a certain way. And this is what we are going to do. Give up the fruit of the action, stay centered in the self, dedicate all of our actions to God, and forget about the past, forget about the future, and forget about the excitation in the present moment. Remember that verse number 30, chapter number 3. This is going further on in chapter number 6, but of course taking that particular theme and describing it in this context. And then once we have mounted, of course, the purification has taken place. And therefore the mind has become quiet. And therefore quiescence is the means for us now going to the next stage, which is deep absorption in the self itself. So again, very logically kind of taking us through the different stages of our journey from Tyāga to Sannyāsa to realization and moksha, of course. For the sage who wishes to attune to yoga, action is said to be the means, and for the same sage, not a different sage, the same sage who has to attune to yoga, quiescence is the means. And if you feel that you have done enough karma yoga, you have done enough bhakti yoga, your mind is becoming quieter and quieter, and we know the sattvic qualities of the mind: shanti, santosh, samadhan, single-pointedness, stillness, and subtlety. If you feel that that has become your primary experience, then what you got to do is to go into dhyana yoga. That becomes your primary sadhana, whereby you begin to go along that pathway. So then, Bhagwan, again, if we look at it from the Sankhya Yoga point of view, we have already seen this, that Sannyāsa, Tyāga, what is its relationship to Sankhya and Yoga, which we saw earlier on, which I again described before. And then putting it in the larger context of the problem, the human condition, which is the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Jiva Vishada. This is what we experience without, taking refuge in our spiritual path. We're going to experience shoka, moha, bhaya. When shoka arises out of what? Out of attractions to the things of the world, based on our vasanas. And what is the solution according to Bhagavad Gita? Jiva, sadhana, Tyāga, and Sannyāsa, which leads to liberation. So again, framing it within the context of Tyāga and Sannyāsa, this is what the solution is. Karma phala Tyāga, karma Sannyāsa, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, saguna bhakti, nirguna bhakti, and this is moksha. So remember, moksha sannyasa. And you can see where Tyāga actually fits into the picture. And we need to keep that in mind, that we have got two things to deal with. One is that we are attached to the fruit of our actions. And the more attached we are in the Rajasic and the Tamasic ways, the more kind of Vishada we are going to experience. There is a relationship between Vishada, in other words, the distressing experiences which even Arjuna was having in the middle of the battlefield. Think about in the last 48 hours, how many distressing emotions you have experienced. Bhaya, moha, shoka. And that is because the intensity or the connection with the fruit of the actions is there. And because the stronger that attachment to the object of our desire and the fruit of our action, the greater those experiences are going to be. So karma phala Tyāga reduces the shoka, moha, bhaya. And sannyasa reduces this identification with everything to do with me. The body, the mind, the intellect, the ego functioning system, whatever is going on, I can step apart from there. So this is now the kind of overall picture in which, again, the sense of doership and enjoyship is being given up. Now, in this chapter, just to give you a kind of overview of the chapter, Bhagwan talks about Tyāga and Sannyāsa in verse number 1 to 12. So, giving Arjuna the answer to his question about Tyāga and Sannyāsa. And from 13 onwards, he talks about the causes and the basis of karma and action. Then he talks about the gunic explanation, or the explanation within the context of the gunas as far as knowledge is concerned. You remember I was saying knowledge is important so that we got to understand which kind of knowledge are we having. Karma, action also from 23 to 25, again in terms of sattva, rajas, tamas, and agent, which is you and me, this sense of agency that I'm the doer of all these things, I'm the karta. And this is also explained in relationship to the gunas, Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic agents or kartas. And then goes on to explain about the buddhi, intelligence, and we'll see why that is important as well, and fortitude, which I mentioned just at the beginning. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas becomes the framework within which all these things are going to be explained by Bhagwan. These 6 elements are very important for us to understand in our sadhana and in the context of Tyāga and Sannyāsa. And of course, Bhagwan then very wonderfully summarizes Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga in this manner. And finally, will give us the conclusion. And of course, this is the time when Bhagwan asked him, have you understood what I said? What do you want to do? And Arjuna accepts the challenge of spiritual path, reframing his whole experience in terms of the beliefs, the spiritual beliefs, and says, I'm now ready to stand up and fight. So the Arjuna's transformation from a defeated, dejected person to a person who stands up and fight. What has gone on from chapter number 1 right up to chapter number 18? Something has happened, right? And something has happened is what Bhagwan has taken him through this wonderful journey of experiencing the highest bliss in the way in which we will one day experience ourselves. And this transformation is absolutely possible. Transformation is available to us through this knowledge, and all we have to do is to have fortitude, intelligence, have the right sense of agency, have the right ideas about karma, and have the right knowledge. And that will lead us to the right type of sukham in the first place. And then eventually will take us to the highest realization. Now, this is the scheme of the chapter. So let's go to the Arjuna's question first of all. So Arjuna says, I desire to know severally, O mighty arm, the essence or truth of renunciation, or Rishikesha, as also of abandonment, which is Tyāga, or slayer of Keshi, Krishna. So Arjuna wants to know in detail the truth, the essence of the truth about, first of all, Sannyāsa, and then secondly about Tyāga. And we may wonder why Arjuna is asking this question, because in the previous chapter we're talking about, other things which then has triggered or something in Arjuna's mind, which is to say, okay, you have talked about all these things in terms of the three gunas and how we can look at various different things in terms of my actions and what I'm doing as Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic, where the attachment is coming from, and so on and so on. Is now bringing the focus back onto the practical aspects of renunciation and abandonment and the relationship to those two moksha. So he wants to know the truth of renunciation as well as abandonment. So Bhagwan says, the sages understand sannyas to be renunciation of works with desire. That is number one. And the wise declare the abandonment of the fruit of all actions as Tyāga. So fruit of all actions means that anything which I do will have a result. This is the law of karma yoga. Karma. Law of karma says whatever you do will have a consequence, and that consequence is the result of our actions. So normally what happens, we are attached to the result of our actions. I want this, I want that, I want this in a particular way, I want it in this particular form. And think about the cup of coffee. You want it exactly as you like it. In this case, I want a particular result, and we get attached. So what Bhagwan is saying, abandonment is giving up all those fruits of all of our actions. On the other hand, sannyas, renunciation of works with desire. In other words, I give up the actions itself. And if I give up the action, as well as the fruit of the action, then my pathway is clear to take me to that which is the highest. So all actions should be abandoned as evil. Some philosophers declare, others declare there are certain things which you can't give up. Acts of sacrifice, gift, austerity should not be relinquished. In other words, these will keep on going on. Even if you abandon everything which have to do with the desire, which have to do with the vasanas, whether it is Rajasic, Tamasic or Sattvic, there are certain things which will not be given up, which is sacrifice, gift and austerity. Where the actions are related to that, there is no giving up. So hear from me the conclusion or the final truth. Bhagwan says, this abandonment, or best of Bharatas, abandonment has been declared to be of three kinds. What are the three kinds? And he will explain just now. And the acts of sacrifice, yajna, charity, dana, austerity, tapas, should not be abandoned, but should be performed with the way in which Bhagwan has described this to us before, within the gunas as a Sattvic yajna, Sattvic dana, and Sattvic tapas. Worship, charity, and also austerity, what he says is very important here. They are the purifiers of even the wise. Even the wise. Now, what does he mean by even the wise, the sages? Because they've gone through this whole purification process. And what he's saying, even if there is something which is remaining, which needs to be purified, and even in the state of Sattvic purification, if we still want to purify ourselves of the Sattvic guna itself, then perhaps sacrifice, charity, and austerity will take us that one step further and give us that entire purity. But even these actions should be performed leaving aside what? The attachments and the fruits, whatever it is, that abandonment needs to be complete. Okay, so you can do the act, but leaving aside the fruit of the action, but these are the purifiers, and therefore the purification is important for our journey, and we need to make sure that we are doing some of these things. In other words, do the prescribed actions, but do them without attachment to the results. Again, this message is coming through that there is certain things which we are going to do, and this is the ordinance of the scriptures, like Bhagwan has told us before, Shabda Praman, whereby we have to carry out certain things. Now, if we go to the next section, which is the threefold nature of abandonment, then Bhagwan says, obligatory actions. Renunciation of those actions which we are obliged to do is not proper. We have to keep on doing our obligatory actions. The abandonment of these is declared to be Tamasic. In other words, we don't do the things which we are obliged to do, living in this world in a rational manner. And if we don't do that, then we are overcome by this delusion, and you say, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. The Tamasic person is always using this kind of language. I don't care, and I don't wish to care. I don't want to do this thing, and I'm not going to do it. Tamasic and dull. Now, the Rajasic is which one? Fear of bodily trouble, abandons action because of pain. Pain in the body, pain in the mind, pain in the intellect. And because this particular action, this obligatory action, if I'm going to give it up because there is some kind of distress which I'm going to experience, then this is called the Rajasic way of functioning, and there is no fruit, purification of abandonment, which comes as a result of this abandonment. Because why? Because we are still attached. See, the attachment is still there, and therefore we are not going to get the fruit of this abandonment. Why? Because it's Rajasic abandonment. It's not going to give any result. Whatever obligatory action is done merely because it ought to be done. What does it mean ought to be done? Because it's dharma. Abandoning attachment and also the fruit, that abandonment is regarded as sattvic, pure. So Bhagwan is now giving us the idea about what is it to say that this abandonment or this Tyāga is Tamasic, Rajasic, or Sattvic. And if you understand it, that I'm giving this up because I'm feeling distressed, then that's the wrong attitude. I'm not doing this because I don't know why, because it doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not going to do it. And even out of ignorance, not doing it is again a Tamasic way. What we need to do is to do the things which ought to be done and giving up the fruit of the action. So here's the summary of that. Sattvic abandonment ought to be done without attachment. Rajasic abandonment, fear of bodily issues, pain. Tamasic abandonment through delusion. Here we are talking about Tyāga. And then the threefold nature of abandonment, Bhagwan goes further to say, the abandoner soaked in purity, the Tyāgi, soaked in purity, being intelligent, and all his doubts cut asunder, hates not disagreeable action. So what do we require? Purity, intelligence, no doubts, no confusions, and there is no hatred for any action, even if it's disagreeable. Nor is he attached to an agreeable action. In other words, there is this equanimity between the likes and the dislikes. I don't like doing this, I'm not going to do it. I like doing this, I'm going to do it. That has disappeared. And he is doing the things which ought to be done. In this case, he says, verily it is not possible for embodied being to abandon actions entirely. Nobody can give up actions entirely, but he who relinquishes the fruit of actions is verily called a relinquisher. This is the Tyāgi. Tyāgi is giving up the fruits of the action. Because in this embodied form, as this jiva, it's going to be very hard to give up actions altogether. Why? Because there's this sense of identity which is still remaining. But in the case of the Tyāgi, he at least has given up all the fruits of the actions. The threefold fruit of action, evil, good, mixed, accrues after death only to those who have no spirit of abandonment, Tyāga, never to the total Tyāgis. In other words, what he's saying is that if there is this spirit of abandonment, then this evil and good and mixed results which come after death, the result of our action, in other words, the karmic consequences of our actions can only be there if there is the me and the mind. As the me and the mind disappears, the purification takes place. Then the consequences of karma begins to get stopped. First thing is to stop more karmas from developing. First thing is to make more vasanas to be generated and to be strengthened. And this is what we call the process of purification again. And if that is gone, if we have totally given up the fruit of the action, as well as the me, the identification with the body, mind, intellect, then we will be now not having any karma or vasana developing further. In fact, they get totally sattvified, and in the process, we will be able to sit in dhyana and transcend into that which is the eternal. So, nature of action. Now, this is the interesting part. There are 5 aspects of action, 5 causes for accomplishment of all actions. In other words, if action is to be accomplished, we need these 5 factors, as declares in the Samkhya Upanishad system, and which is the end of all actions. Number 1, the seat, body. Number 2, the doer, ego. Number 3, the organs of perception, which are, what we gather information from the world around us. The different functions of various organs of action. Organs of action, as we know, there are 5, and organs of perception, as we know, are also 5. The doer, the seat, and then the presiding deity. These are the devas, which sit in these various different places and make these things to function. And whatever action a man performs by body, speech, and mind, whether right or wrong, the reverse, these 5 are its causes. Body, doer, organs of perception, organs of action, and the presiding deities. This is what makes the body, mind, and the speech to be performing various different actions. Now, such being the case, Bhagwan says, owing to the untrained understanding, looks upon his self, the higher self, which is never conditioned by the engine. By engine, we mean the body, mind, intellect, which is alone. It is not dual, it is one. That now is seen through my ignorance, my untrained understanding, as the doer. And he of perverted intelligence sees not. So through delusion, through maya, through ignorance, through avidya, I mistake one thing for the other. I assume that this is the reality, that I am this body, mind, intellect. I am this jiva who is suffering, and I do things according to my Rajasic and Tamasic nature. And in this case, I become the doer, and I become the enjoyer of the fruits of my actions. So he who is free from ego notion, intelligence is not tainted. In other words, there is clear understanding. Intelligence is clear. It's not tainted by good or evil. And he slays these people. He slays not. Bringing the picture back into Arjuna's mind that, his first kind of expression was that these are my kith and kin. I don't want to slay them. Bhagwan is saying, if you are free from the ego notion, if your intelligence is not tainted by good or evil, which means that, the likes and the dislikes and the raga dvesha is gone, and he slays these people, he slays not. Then what is the effect of that is the consequences of the actions are not experienced by this person. And he is not bound by any action. So you can see we are moved away from this ego who was operating without any understanding and has mistaken this self to be the body, mind, intellect, and functioning in the Rajasic and Tamasic way in such a way that gets bound, and he sees not that this is a false identity, whereas the person who has purified, the ego notion has gone, the intelligence is not tainted, and his actions have no consequences. So going further, Bhagwan is now going to explain to us the impulse to and basis of action. Knowledge, the known, the knower, form the threefold impulse to action. Organs, the action, the agent, form the threefold basis of action. So impulse to action is what is kind of pushing us towards action. And the basis of action, what is the process, what are the elements of that action? In other words, the organs, the action, and the agent are the basis of action. Knowledge, action, actor are declared to be the science of temperaments, the gunas to be of three kinds only, according to the distinctions of temperaments. Hear them also duly. So Bhagwan has now taken this knowledge, knower, known, organs of action and perception, the action, the agent, and kind of reduced them to three things: knowledge, action, and actor, agent, the knower. And the organs, action, known, the knowledge. And this is now what he's going to describe. So if we take the impulse and the basis of action, we can think about three things. These three categories: knowledge, action, and agent. And then to describe what is Sattvic knowledge, Rajasic and Tamasic knowledge, and similarly with action, and similarly with the actor or the agent. So that we can get a clear picture. Where do we need to go? Which transformation do we require? What is the understanding which we have to know in the terms of knowledge, in terms of action, in terms of my sense of agency? Where do we need to make that shift in ourselves? So let's take the first one, which is the knowledge, action, and the agent. So first of all, the knowledge. So what is Sattvic knowledge? This is what we got to understand. Why? Because we need to take that as a firm foundation of our spiritual journey. We see only one reality, and the undivided in the divided, seeing the one in all, and seeing the one. So all in one in all, and one only. This is the Sattvic knowledge. Okay. Knowledge to do with the reality. Knowledge to do with how I see the world as a diverse number of objects around me, people around me. What I've got to recognize through this kind of knowledge is that there is one reality, and this reality which is appearing to be diverse and divided, actually it is undivided. That is the Sattvic knowledge. What is the Rajasic knowledge? I see distinct entities, and I see each one different. And I don't see any commonalities, or the underlying essence of this is the same, as I was saying in the Sattvic way. Now, remember, all these are lessons for us. If I'm looking at the world and I'm saying, look at this person, look at that person, look at this this particular object, look at the other object, and looking at each one distinctly without any understanding of the underlying reality in all objects. Each one is different. Then I am functioning according to Rajasic knowledge. What do we need to do? We need to shift our understanding, knowledge, and take it to the Sattvic way of knowledge. And the Tamasic knowledge clings to single effect as if it is the whole. No reason, no truth, and a very narrow understanding of very different things. So the knowledge is very limited. Even it is a false knowledge. There is no reasoning behind anything, and clinging to one single effect as if it is going to take care of the whole thing. This is the kind of simplicity which the Tamasic knowledge is pointing us to. So now, remember, all these are kind of ways of ourselves understanding as seekers as to where do we move towards. If we find that we are still experiencing diverse, distinct entities and each one looks different than the other, or we are pointing one single effect to everything, and then we are not using the intellect, we are kind of running away with falsehood, and our understanding is very narrow, then we know that we have to start changing certain things as far as knowledge is concerned. What about action? Action, Sattvic action, what kind of action it is? Ordained. Ordained means what? It is prescribed according to the scriptures. Free from attachment. Action which is free from attachment, done without love or hatred, without any raga dvesha, and not desirous of the fruit of the action. So as much as we move in this kind of way, we are moving our action in the Sattvic category. And then Rajasic is whereby there is always some kind of longing. I want this. So as I said, that I see this, I like this, I want this. This is the way Rajas functions, is that as long as there is longing for desire because the pressure of the vasanas are pushing me in that direction, I want to gain this, I want to gain that. Why do I want to gain it? Because I think it's going to give me happiness. So I try to grab happiness by grabbing objects and people and things and beings and situations in my life. And I have to make such a lot of effort, working 18 hours a day and working 7 days a week and 365 days a year. Make so much effort. Because why? I want to get this, I want to get that, etc. This is Rajas. Think about all the time you are spending in terms of attaining things, acquiring things, and protecting things. This is Rajasic action. And then the Tamasic action is undertaken from delusion. In other words, the mind is very fuzzy, doesn't know what it's doing, ignorance, even about action. I don't know why I'm doing it, and I'm doing it in complete kind of unknowingness, and it becomes very impulsive without regard for the consequence. I don't even know what the consequence of this action is going to be, and I don't care. Injury and with a consequence of loss, injury, and ability also goes down. So you can see actions we are doing every moment, every day. We need to analyze. Is it Sattvic? Is it Rajasic? Or is it Tamasic? See, becoming a sincere seeker requires a lot of effort as well. So as much as Rajasic energy requires, Rajasic energy is expended in getting objects. We want to get the highest object. And this is called mumukshutva. And through that, very intense desire for liberation, we can do a lot, and we need to do the lot, but we need to do it in the right way. Free from attachment, done without any raga dvesha, and not desiring the fruit of the action. It's a very subtle distinction we have to start thinking about. And then the agent free from attachment, no egoistic, endowed with firmness and enthusiasm, unaffected by success or failure. This is how I should be feeling. I should be feeling I'm free from attachment. I'm not expressing my ego. I am firm in my spiritual path. I have enthusiasm for my spiritual path. Whether I attain or don't attain, I'm not affected. Rajasic is passionate, desiring the fruit of the action, greedy, harmful, impure, full of delight, and full of grief. So again, think about, how you feel. If any of these things are related to my sense of agency, that I'm the doer, and this doer is passionate, the doer is requiring the fruits of the action, etc., then we are functioning in the Rajasic mode. We need to lift ourselves into the Sattvic mode. Tamasic is unsteady, vulgar, unbending, cheating, malicious, lazy, despondent, procrastinating. All this, if that is expressing in our lives, in our day, in the moment, we need to think about, okay, this is not what I want. I don't want to be a Tamasic agent. I want to be the Sattvic one. How do I progress to that? It requires a lot of effort, I'm telling you. And of course, the 4As are really the ones which are going to help us to attain all these things, because it's in the moment that we have got to be changing all these things. Otherwise, moment has passed, thing is gone. Okay, going further, threefold nature of understanding and fortitude. So Bhagwan says here the threefold division of understanding and fortitude, according to the qualities, the gunas, as I declare them fully and severally, or Dhananjaya. Understanding should be how, knows the path of works and renunciation, what ought to be done, what ought not to be done, fear and fearlessness, bondage and liberation. Understanding all these things, understanding what the fear is all about. And we always have some kind of fear boiling in our head. I'm anxious about this. As soon as I say anxious about this, our mind should get alerted. Fear is there. How can I go towards fearlessness? I'm feeling attached to this, that, and the other. Bondage. How can I go towards liberation? What is it that I need to understand in this particular instant, in this moment, in my transaction in this life? What do I need to understand right now, which is going to take me towards the Sattvic action and the Sattvic way of knowledge and agency? Rajasic understanding is wrongly understands dharma, adharma, doesn't have clear idea about what is dharma, what is adharma, what ought to be done, what ought not to be done. Also, there is a wrong understanding. And perhaps this is what was, confusing one part, maybe, which was confusing Arjuna as well, not making a kind of clear distinction between dharma and adharma, what ought to be done. And that's why he says, I'm confused, I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do. And then the tamasic understanding, enveloped in darkness, very kind of fuzzy mind again, and sees adharma as dharma, mistaking two things rather than confusion, mistaking one for the other. And all things get perverted. Why? Because there is only ignorance, darkness of the mind. There is kind of apathy, heedlessness, as we have seen before. So many tamasic qualities we have described already. And then fortitude. Now you know why we require fortitude. If you've just been listening to all the things which we are supposed to look out for and to change, then you know why we require fortitude in our spiritual journey. This fortitude is this strength of purpose and intention. How do we get sattvic fortitude? Through yoga, the functions of the mind, the prana, the senses, being restrained. See, at the heart of this is discipline. Very strong sense of discipline, and that gives us the strength, the fortitude. Why? Because I'm able to control this, and that gives me the strength. My strength lies in my discipline. And this is what we got to understand, that Discipline is at the heart of fortitude. Whereas the Rajasic fortitude holds fast to duty, pleasure, wealth from attachment and craving for the fruit of the action. See how the Rajasic person is always interested in what am I going to get out of this? And therefore doing things so that always in mind, I need this, I need that. And trying to get something out of pleasure, wealth, duty, even if it's duty, but it's a mistaken idea of duty, is that if I do my duty, I'm expecting something from you because I'm doing my duty as a parent. I want you children to make sure that you reward me with something. So it is really interesting how these things actually work in our own lives. And why Bhagwan is telling us all this is we got to watch out for these things. If we don't watch out for these things, nobody is going to tell us, no, you're doing this thing wrong. Bhagwan is telling us. And if we have this faith in the master, faith in the scriptures, and we have an alert and aware mind with the hard work which we can put in our seeking, guaranteed in this life, you can get moksha. Tamasic fortitude is unsteady, vulgar again, unbending, cheating, malicious, lazy, despondent, procrastinating. This is where the fortitude is called tamasic. Unsteady. Sometimes this way, that way, unbending, sometimes holding on so strongly that not even knowing why am I holding to this thing so strongly. Cheating ways of getting things and obtaining things, keeping things, malicious, having bad intentions, lazy, not doing things which they were supposed to be done, despondent, and always putting things off. Always putting things off. And we do that quite a lot sometimes when we get into this kind of tamasic mode of functioning. I'll do it tomorrow. And when tomorrow comes, I'll do it tomorrow. And it keeps on going on and on. If any of these things are there with the Rajasic fortitude, Tamasic fortitude, we need to move away from there and get into discipline of the mind through yoga, which means through our actions, not just in the mind, we will get this Sattvic fortitude in ourselves. Okay, so the threefold nature of pleasure, because having done all the actions, we now, said, okay, the action has been done, and the outcome normally we think in terms of, is it given me happiness? Has it not given me happiness? What kind of happiness is there? This is what Bhagwan is telling us now. Hear from me of the threefold pleasure or joy, in which one rejoices by practice and surely comes to the end of pain. How is that Sattvic joy? It is like poison first, but in the end, like nectar. If you have ever tried to change a habit, it is like poison. It's so hard, very hard to do, and it feels like poison. Oh my God, this is too hard. It's very painful. It's like poison. But once you get through that phase of hard work, no gain without pain. Go through the painful process. It is like poison. But what comes out of it is really nectar. Remember the churning of the ocean, something to do with that as well. Born of the purity of one's own mind. It's not a joy which is coming from the object or the person or the thing, but it spontaneously arises in the sattvicness of the mind. Shanti and santosh, remember, and samadhan. When they begin to get established in the pure mind, the effect is joy. Contentment, like Bhagwan says in chapter number 2, peace and contentment lead to enormous joy. And if it is already established in the Sattvic mind, guaranteed this kind of joy arising from the purity of the mind, it will come. And due to self-realization, of course, realization that I am that infinite self will also bring that joy. And ultimately, of course, it is ananda, ananda of the absolute truth and existence and bliss. This is coming through realization of the true self. Whereas the Rajasic is like nectar fast. It's so sweet, but it ends up like poison. And we have seen this many times in our lives that, something starts off being very sweet and then it becomes like poison. And, like things, we may enjoy them, but then we begin to have, negative thoughts about things and people, etc. And this is Rajasic, arises from contact of the sense organs with the objects. And this is the contact which is due to what? It is my vasanas pushing through my mind and intellect as desires and pushing me towards the object and contact through the sense organs. And that becomes like my object of my joy. Looks pleasurable to start with, then it becomes like poison. And the missing element there, of course, is the purity of the mind, because it's a Rajasic mind, predominantly Rajasic. And Tamasic joy at first and later on also dilutes the self. Again, ignorance, as if the mind has gone to sleep. And in sleep and delusion, indolence and heedlessness, the Tamasic person will get his or her joy. So we can see, again, lesson for us is what? I am feeling happy now. The question to ask ourselves, what kind of joy is it? Where has it come from? Is it through my attachment to the object of my senses? Is it I'm feeling indolence? I want to, go to sleep and I get joy out of just sleeping, even throughout the day. Find out where your happiness is coming from, where your joy is coming from, and whether it is Sattvic, Rajasic, or Tamasic. Important to very much to understand. Okay, so finally, what will we do now? And of course, reminding ourselves again the 4 A's, the 4 B's, the 4 C's, the 4 D's. This is where you are going to make a change. Make a change, because if we keep on doing the same thing again and again, what do we get? The same result. If we change something, we'll get a different result. And of course, the whole basis of sadhana is change, inner transformation. And how are we going to do that? Conscious living. How is conscious living going to be done? By the 4 A's, B's, C's, D's. And if you can do this, then with this commitment and this fortitude and this dedication to the goal of and the purpose of life, with these 4 A's, we will definitely get to the point of realization. So as far as chapter 18 is concerned, Yoga of Liberation through Renunciation, first of all, reflect on and understand the nature of renunciation and abandonment, because it's important to understand what is Tyāga and what is Sannyāsa. Which one comes first, which comes later, which is to be done how, and which is to be done in the way of Sattvic, Rajas, and Tamas. In terms of the guṇa-s, renunciation, abandonment, and all the aspects of the individual, knowledge, agent, and whatever else Bhagwan has described to us, how do we think that in terms of the Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic natures, and how we can begin to ascend into the Sattvic guna. Prepare a plan to practice, cultivate the Sattvic forms of all aspects of knowledge, action, and agency, understanding, and fortitude. We've got 5 things here. 5 things. If you say, okay, Monday I'm going to focus on knowledge, Tuesday I'm going to focus on action, agency, and then understanding and fortitude, your week is done. Okay, you've got a plan for the whole week. And of course, there are many other things which we have been doing so far. Contemplate on the references to renunciation, abandonment given by Bhagwan earlier. I've already mentioned some of them to you, but do your own thinking and research and reflection and find out how these are kind of connected by Bhagwan in all the chapters. And finally, what is he saying about that? And of course, the main thing is living through the Gita, which means how can you practice this in your own life? Continue to practice all other techniques from the previous chapters. Meditation, of course, very important. Daily intensified plan of meditation. If you already don't have one, please start planning and doing. Because even if you say, okay, my mind is not purified, it's going all over the place, when I sit down, I sometimes go into a lot of agitation, or sometimes I go to sleep. Even if that is happening, just discipline yourself in sitting down in meditation, just keeping the body still, the gaze still, just like we do at the beginning of class. And then when the mind gets purified, you will see the fantastic effect of sitting down in meditation and then enjoying this inner peace and calmness. Why? Because you have already trained the body and the gaze to be still, to be aware of the body, mind, intellect, to be observing all these things. And when the purity comes, it becomes so easy then to get into dhyana. So keep on doing meditation every day. Enjoy the sadhana, stay safe and stay well. Thank you. And that brings us to the first part of chapter number 18. Hari Om. So we shall conclude with the prayers again.
Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaः Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukha Bhag Bhavet. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Natatra Suryo Bhati na Chandra Tarakam Nema Vidyuto Bhanti Kuto Yamagnihi Tameva Bhantam Anubhati Sarvam Tasya Bhasa Sarvamidam Vibhati. Boliye Sadgurunath Maharaj Ki Jai.